The young rich man lifts the lid of the boiling tank and puts his 4-year-old niece inside. She screams. The farm horse neighs loudly, breaks free from the rope, and charges toward the kitchen. But first, if you love animals as much as we do, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any emotional stories. Thank you. Now let's get back to our story. The golden hills of Montana's Bridger Range stretched out beneath a sky so vast it threatened to swallow the land whole. Nestled between ancient valleys carved by glaciers, Whitewater Ranch stood as it had for over a century, a testament to the Hawkins family's stubborn perseverance. For generations, the weathered wooden fences had contained not just cattle and horses, but stories of survival only the mountains remembered. Mason Hawkins stared out the window of what was now his office, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the hardwood floors his grandfather had installed with calloused hands. 3 weeks had passed since the heart attack that took his father, and already the ranch felt different. Mason had spent 15 years building a real estate empire in Chicago, and he viewed the 5,000-acre inheritance through the cold lens of investment potential. "Mr. Hawkins," a weathered voice called from the doorway. "The contractors are here. About the north pasture." Mason turned to see Robert Turner, Old Bob, as everyone called him, standing with his hat in hand. The ranch foreman had managed the property for 30 years, his leathery skin and quiet dignity as much a part of Whitewater as the mountains themselves. "Send them in," Mason said, not bothering to hide his impatience. "And have someone prepare the guest room. My sister's dropping off her kid tomorrow." Old Bob's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Little Emma? Haven't seen her since she was knee-high to a grasshopper." "She's still not much taller than that," Mason muttered. "Olivia's research trip to Ecuador got moved up. I'm stuck with the kid for a month." "Children have a way of finding their place here," Bob said quietly. "Always been that way at Whitewater." Mason waved his hand dismissively. "Just make sure she stays out of my way. I've got 3 development companies coming to tour the property this month." Later that afternoon, Mason paced the wraparound porch as blueprints unfurled on the table before him. The architect was explaining how the historic ranch house could be converted into a clubhouse for a luxury housing development, while the northern pastures would make an excellent golf course. Mason nodded approvingly, mentally calculating the return on investment. The old stables and eastern pastures would be phase 2, the architect continued. "We'd preserve some of the rustic elements as a marketing angle, but modernize everything else." "Perfect," Mason said, signing the preliminary agreement. "I want to move quickly on this." The sound of tires on gravel interrupted them. A dusty SUV pulled up, and Mason's sister Olivia stepped out, her curly brown hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. From the passenger side emerged a small figure with a purple backpack nearly as big as she was. Emma Matthews stood uncertainly beside the car, her wide green eyes taking in the vastness around her. At 4 years old, she barely reached her mother's hip, but there was an alert intensity to her gaze that made Mason uncomfortable. The child reminded him too much of his father. "I can't thank you enough," Olivia said, hugging her brother, despite his stiff posture. The Galapagos field research opportunity came up suddenly and, "It's fine," Mason cut her off. "We'll manage." Emma approached silently, studying Mason with solemn eyes. "Are you my uncle?" she asked, her voice small but clear. "Yeah, that's me," Mason replied, awkwardly patting her head. "Do you have horses?" Emma asked, brightening. Before Mason could respond, old Bob appeared. "We sure do, little miss. Some of the finest horses. In Montana." He knelt down to her level. "Would you like to see them tomorrow?" Emma nodded vigorously, her blonde pigtails bouncing. "We have a flight to catch," Olivia said apologetically, kissing her daughter goodbye. "Be good for Uncle Mason, sweetie. I'll call every night." As the SUV disappeared down the winding road, Mason turned to find Emma staring up at him expectantly. "I have work to do," he said. "Mrs. Potts will show you to your room." That evening, thunder rolled across the valley as rain lashed against the windows. Mason sat at his desk, reviewing property valuations and ignoring the occasional small sounds. In from the guest room, a knock at his door revealed the ranch's housekeeper, Martha Potts, her grey hair twisted in a tight bun. "The little one's asking for a glass of water," she said, "and maybe a nightlight. Storm's got her spooked." "Take care of it," Mason said without looking up. "Whatever she needs." Later, passing the guest room on his way to bed, Mason noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, Emma sat wrapped in blankets, her small face illuminated by a bedside lamp. "The thunder is angry," she whispered when she saw him. Something about her expression made Mason pause. "It's just clouds bumping together," he said, surprising himself by entering the room. "Nothing to be afraid of. Mommy says the sky is crying sometimes." Mason sat awkwardly on the edge of the bed. "Your mom always was full of stories." Emma's small hand reached for his. "Can you tell me one? About when you were little here?" Mason withdrew his hand and stood up. "It's late, go to sleep." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the mountains freshly washed by the storm. Mason gulped coffee in the kitchen when Emma appeared, dressed in overalls and a yellow t-shirt, her hair messy from sleep. "Good morning," she said politely. "Can I see the horses now?" "I have meetings all day," Mason replied. "Mrs. Potts will get you breakfast." Emma's face fell, but she nodded bravely. As Mason gathered his papers, old Bob appeared at the back door. "Thought I might show Miss Emma around this morning, if that's all right with you," the foreman said. "Ranch hands are moving cattle to the south pasture, but I can spare a couple hours." "Fine," Mason said, relieved to have the child occupied. From his office window later that morning, Mason watched as old Bob led Emma across the yard toward the stables. The child skipped alongside the weathered cowboy, her hand tucked trustingly in his. For a moment, Mason felt a strange twinge. This was how his father would have greeted Emma, with warmth and stories, not spreadsheets and conference calls. The feeling vanished as his phone rang. The Planning Commission was calling about rezoning applications. By the time he finished the call, Emma and Bob had disappeared from view. In the cool dimness of the main stable, Emma stood very still, her eyes wide with wonder. The sweet smell of hay mingled with the earthy scent of horses and leather. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that streamed through high windows. "These are our working horses," old Bob explained, stopping by each stall to introduce its occupant. "That's Rusty, he's good with the cattle. And there's Domino, fastest quarter horse in the county." Emma nodded solemnly at each introduction, offering her small hand for Velvet Noses to investigate. At the end of the row, Bob stopped. "Now there's someone special I want you to meet," he said, leading her toward a smaller, separate stable behind the main building. "He doesn't work with the others. Your grandpa kept him special." The old stable was quieter with just one occupant. As they approached, Emma gasped. Inside the spacious stall stood a horse unlike any she'd ever seen, pure white from nose to tail, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to look right through her. "This is Spirit," Bob said quietly. "Your grandpa found him as a colt after a terrible blizzard. His mama didn't make it, but this one survived against all odds. Been here 15 years now." The white horse approached the stall door slowly, his movements graceful and deliberate. He lowered his head, nostrils flaring gently as he took in Emma's scent. "He's beautiful," Emma whispered, standing perfectly still. "He doesn't take to many folks," Bob said. "Your grandpa was about the only one who could really handle him. Horses like this one, they choose their people." Emma raised her small hand, palm up. After a moment's consideration, Spirit gently pressed his nose against it. The touch was warm and soft, like velvet against her skin. "Look at that," Bob murmured. "He's saying hello." A connection formed in that moment, something wordless and profound. Emma felt it like a warm current running through her, and somehow she knew the horse felt it too. His dark eyes held hers, intelligent and knowing. "Can I bring him an apple tomorrow?" she asked, not taking her eyes off Spirit. "I reckon he'd like that just fine," Bob replied, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Back at the main house that evening, Emma sat quietly at dinner while Mason took calls between bites. When Mrs. Potts served dessert, homemade apple pie, Emma carefully wrapped her portion in a napkin. "What are you doing?" Mason asked, noticing the strange behavior. "Saving it for Spirit," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "Who?" "The white horse. Mr. Bob showed him to me. He's my friend now." Mason frowned. "That old stallion, he's practically wild. You stay away from him without supervision." "He's not wild," Emma protested. "He's just careful about who he trusts." Something in her words struck an uncomfortable chord in Mason. "Just be careful," he muttered. "I don't need you getting hurt on my watch." That night, reviewing the latest property assessments, Mason came across a notation about the old stable. According to the development plans, it would need to be demolished to make way for tennis courts and a swimming pool. The horses would be sold off, including the white stallion his father had inexplicably cherished. Mason glanced at the family photograph on the desk, his father astride that same white horse, looking more alive than Mason could remember seeing him in person. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Then he closed the file, pushed back from the desk and reached for his whiskey. Business was business after all. Sentiment had no place in progress. Dawn arrived at Whitewater Ranch in layers of gold and pink, painting the distant mountains. With fire, Emma woke early, clutching her carefully saved apple pie wrapped in a napkin. She dressed quietly, pulled on her red rubber boots, and slipped out the back door while the house still slumbered. Morning dew soaked the hem of her overalls as she crossed the yard, navigating with the confident determination of a child on a mission. A rooster crowed from somewhere near the chicken coop. The ranch was coming alive around her, but Emma paid no attention to anything except the path leading to the old stable. Spirit was waiting. His white head appeared over the stall. Door as if he'd sensed her approach, ears pricked forward, dark eyes watching. Emma climbed carefully onto the lowest rail of the fence, balancing herself with one hand while offering her treasure with the other. "I brought you pie," she whispered. "It's apple. Mrs. Potts made it." The horse's velvet lips delicately took the offering, and Emma giggled as his whiskers tickled her palm. She watched in satisfaction as he chewed, then licked her hand for any remaining crumbs. "My mom is in Ecuador," Emma explained seriously. "That's really far away. She studies butterflies." Spirit shifted his weight, his tail swishing away flies. As he listened, there was something in his stillness that made Emma feel heard. "Uncle Mason doesn't like me very much," she confided, dropping her voice even lower. "He doesn't smile. But Mr. Bob says you're my grandpa's horse, and that makes us family, sort of." The horse blew out a soft breath that ruffled Emma's hair, making her smile. She reached up to stroke his face, and he lowered his head obligingly. "I'll come back tomorrow," she promised. By the time Emma returned to the house, Martha Potts was in the kitchen, concern etched on her kind face. "Land sakes, child, where have you been? I was about to wake the whole ranch looking for you." "I was visiting Spirit," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "He liked the pie." Martha's expression softened. "Well, next time you tell someone before you go wandering off. It's not safe for little ones to be out alone." "Spirit will protect me," Emma said with absolute conviction. Over breakfast, Mason barely glanced up from his laptop when Emma entered the dining room. His phone rang constantly, and the table was covered in maps and documents. "Uncle Mason, can I go riding today?" Emma asked during a rare moment of silence. Mason looked up, seeming almost surprised to find her there. "What? No, you're too young and I have investors visiting this afternoon. But I want to ride Spirit. Mason snorted. That horse is half wild. He's not a pony at a birthday party. He's not wild with me, Emma insisted. He's my friend. Emma, I don't have time for this. Go find Mrs. Potts. She'll find something for you to do. Emma's lower lip trembled, but she straightened her small shoulders and left without another word. As she walked away, Mason felt a flicker of shame that he quickly suppressed. He had a ranch to transform and millions at stake. A child's hurt. Feelings were the least of his concerns. The pattern continued for days. Mason rose early for conference calls with developers and spent his afternoons conducting property tours. Emma woke even earlier, stealing time with Spirit before breakfast. The white horse became her confidant, the keeper of her small secrets and worries. She smuggled him treats, carrots from the kitchen, sugar cubes pocketed at tea time, even flowers she'd picked from the meadow. Old Bob noticed the deepening bond between child and horse. He found Emma one morning, sitting cross-legged in the clean straw of Spirit's stall, chattering away while the massive animal stood guard beside her, his body curved protectively around her small form. "Well, I'll be," Bob murmured. "Never seen him take to anyone like that since your grandpa." Emma looked up, beaming. "He understands everything I say." "I believe he does," Bob agreed, settling his weathered frame against the stall door. "Your grandpa always said some horses have old souls. Reckon Spirit's one of those." "Mr. Bob, why doesn't Uncle Mason like it here? It's the most beautiful place ever." The old foreman considered the question carefully. "Some folks look at land and see only what they can take from it. Others see what they can give to it. Your grandpa was the giving kind. And Uncle Mason is the taking kind." Bob smiled sadly. "He's just forgotten how to listen to this place." Later that week, Mason found himself at the old stable, drawn there almost against his will after a particularly frustrating call with the county permit office. Development was proving more complicated than anticipated, with environmental surveys and water rights creating unexpected hurdles. The white horse watched him approach, ears flicking back and forth. "So you're the famous Spirit," Mason said, feeling foolish for talking to an animal. "Emma seems pretty taken with you." The horse regarded him with what Mason could have sworn was judgment in those dark eyes. He was a magnificent animal, powerfully built, with a proud arch to his neck and a presence that commanded respect. "Dad left me in a mess, you know," Mason continued, surprising himself. "This place hemorrhages money. The cattle operation barely breaks even. Taxes alone would sink it in a decade." Spirit shifted, pawing at the ground with one hoof. "What am I supposed to do? Keep it running as some kind of memorial?" Mason's voice rose. "I built something of my own, away from here. I didn't ask for this responsibility." The horse simply stared, unflinching and steady. In that penetrating gaze, Mason felt uncomfortably seen, as though the animal could peer straight through his rationalizations to the 12-year-old boy who'd once galloped bareback across these same fields, whooping with joy under the endless Montana sky. "It's just business," Mason muttered, turning away. That evening, a summer storm gathered over the mountains. As lightning flashed across the darkening sky, Mason sat in his father's study, reviewing the latest acquisition offer. The development company wanted to start with the East Pastures and Old Stable area, constructing a luxury lodge and vacation cabins. The contract included a significant upfront payment, with additional funds upon completion of Phase 1. A clause near the end caught Mason's attention. Property must be free of all liens, encumbrances, and competing familial claims at time of closing. His lawyer had mentioned something about Olivia potentially having a claim on the property. Their father's will had left the ranch to Mason, but included vague language about the property serving the family for generations to come. It was the kind of sentimental nonsense that could tie up development in court for years if Olivia chose to contest it. Mason poured himself another whiskey, thinking, if he could get Olivia to sign off on the development before construction began, the project could proceed smoothly, but his sister had inherited their father's romantic attachment to the land. She'd fight the development tooth and nail, especially the plans for the old stable where her daughter now spent hours each day with that damned white horse. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Sheriff Tom Reynolds stood at the door, rain dripping from his hat. "Evening, Mason. Sorry to bother you so late." Mason invited him in, offering coffee which the sheriff accepted gratefully. "What brings you out in this weather?" Mason asked. "Just checking in. We've had reports of trespassers on some of the ranches in the area, probably just kids, but with so many properties changing hands, we're staying vigilant." Mason nodded. "I appreciate it. We've had developers visiting, but no one unauthorized that I know of." Sheriff Reynolds studied Mason over the rim of his coffee cup. "Developers, huh? Your daddy always said this land would stay in the family." "Times change," Mason replied stiffly. "That they do." The sheriff set down his cup. "Saw your niece out with old Bob yesterday. That little one's got away with horses just like your daddy." Mason's phone rang, saving him from responding. By the time he finished the call, the sheriff had excused himself back into the rain. Upstairs, Mason passed Emma's room and found the door ajar. Inside, the child sat by the window, watching the storm with wide eyes. When lightning illuminated the sky, she flinched. "You should be sleeping," Mason said from the doorway. Emma turned, her expression troubled. "I'm worried about Spirit. He doesn't like storms." Mason stepped into the room, awkward in this role. He'd never wanted. The horses are fine, the stables are sturdy. "But he's all alone in the old stable," Emma persisted. "Grandpa used to sit with him during storms." Something about her concerned face, so like his sister's, so like his father's, made Mason sigh in resignation. "All the horses are alone. During storms, that's just how it is. But Spirit is special," Emma insisted. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof. Mason checked his watch, nearly midnight. "You need to sleep. I have an important meeting in Bozeman tomorrow." Emma's shoulders slumped, but she climbed back into bed. As Mason turned to leave, her small voice stopped him. "Uncle Mason, you going to sell Whitewater Ranch?" The question caught him off guard. "Where did you hear that?" "I heard Mr. Bob talking to Sheriff Reynolds. He said you were bringing city people to look at the land." Mason frowned. "It's complicated, Emma, adult business." "But what about the horses? What about Spirit?" "That's enough questions," Mason said firmly. "Go to sleep." As he closed the door, Mason heard a small sniffle from inside the room. Again came that twinge of something uncomfortable, not quite guilt, but close enough to annoy him. He pushed it aside. Children were resilient. Emma would adapt, just as he had after leaving the ranch all those years ago. The next morning, Mason left early for his meeting in Bozeman, instructing Mrs. Potts to keep an eye on Emma. The meeting went well. The investors were impressed with the property's potential and eager to begin development of the luxury resort. "Just one concern," the lead investor said as they concluded. "The environmental surveyor mentioned an old water tank on the property, something about it being a potential hazard." "The irrigation tank," Mason nodded. "It's been out of use for years. We'll have it removed before construction starts." Driving back to the ranch that afternoon, Mason's thoughts turned to the old metal tank near the eastern pasture. His father had installed it decades ago to capture runoff for irrigation, but modern systems had made it obsolete. Now it sat abandoned, a massive cylindrical structure half buried in the ground, its metal walls baking in the summer sun. He'd need to check it before the final inspection. Making a mental note, Mason turned down the long driveway to Whitewater, the sun setting behind him as he pulled up to the house. Martha Potts greeted him with a worried expression. Emma's been at the stable all day, she reported. That child's barely eaten a thing. Just sits with that horse for hours on end. She'll come back when she's hungry, Mason replied dismissively. But as evening fell, Emma still hadn't returned. Old Bob appeared at the back door, hat in hand. Mason thought you should know. I've secured the old irrigation tank with a new padlock. Found Emma climbing on it this afternoon. That old metal's not safe, could collapse or she could fall in. Mason nodded, a chill running through him at the thought. Thanks, Bob. Have you seen her recently? Not since I sent her back to the house around 4. Figured she was with Mrs. Potts. An uneasy feeling settled over Mason. He grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the old stable, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread. The night was quiet, crickets chirping in the tall grass as his boots crunched along the gravel path. The stable was empty. Spirit's stall stood open, the white horse nowhere to be seen. Mason swung the flashlight in a wide arc, calling Emma's name. No answer came back except the distant hooting of an owl. As Mason turned back toward the house to organize a proper search, something caught his attention. A flash of white in the darkness near the old irrigation tank. Spirit stood there, motionless, in the beam of Mason's flashlight, his coat gleaming like a ghost in the night. The horse pawed at the ground, then raised his head to look directly at Mason. A chill ran down Mason's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. The horse pawed again, more insistently, then moved to the tank's locked metal hatch, pushing against it with his nose. "Emma!" Mason called, breaking into a run. "Emma, are you out here?" Only silence answered, but as Mason drew closer, he heard something else. The rhythmic sound of hooves striking metal as Spirit began to beat against the side of the irrigation tank with increasing urgency. Mason's heart hammered in his chest as he reached the old irrigation tank. Spirit continued his frantic assault on the metal structure, hooves striking with a precision that seemed impossible for an animal. The horse's eyes reflected the beam of Mason's flashlight, wild with what could only be described as desperation. "Emma!" Mason shouted, rattling the padlocked hatch. "Emma, are you in there?" A faint sound came from within, so weak he almost missed it beneath the drumming of Spirit's hooves. "Help! Uncle Mason!" "Jesus Christ!" Mason whispered, yanking frantically. At the padlock, it was new, sturdy, the kind that couldn't be broken without tools. "Emma, I'm going to get you out. Hold on!" Spirit whinnied sharply as if urging Mason to hurry. The horse paced in agitated circles, returning to strike the tank's side with unnerving precision. "I need bolt cutters," Mason muttered, running his hands. "Over the lock. Emma, how did you get in there?" Her response was too faint to make out. "I'm going for help," Mason called into the tank. "I'll be right back. I promise." As he turned to run, Spirit blocked his path, teeth bared. Mason froze, suddenly aware of how dangerous a panicked horse could be. The stallion's muscles quivered with tension, his ears pinned flat against his head. "I need to get tools," Mason explained, feeling ridiculous for reasoning with an animal. "I can't open it without tools." Spirit pawed the ground, then turned, his head toward the maintenance shed visible in the distance. The message was unmistakable. "Go, but hurry." Mason sprinted across the field, the beam of his flashlight bouncing wildly ahead of him. He burst into the shed, frantically searching the pegboard of tools until he found what he needed: heavy-duty bolt cutters. Grabbing them, he raced back to the tank. Spirit stood sentinel, his white coat ghostly in the darkness. At Mason's approach, the horse stepped aside, dark eyes watching intently. "I'm back, Emma," Mason called, positioning the bolt cutters around the padlock's shackle. "Stand back from the hatch if you can." With a grunt of effort, Mason squeezed the handles together. The lock resisted, then gave way with a sharp crack. Mason flung it aside and heaved up the heavy metal hatch. The beam of his flashlight illuminated the interior of the tank. 10 feet below, Emma floated on a wooden plank, her face pale and drawn. The walls of the tank had been heating in the Sun all day, creating an oven-like environment inside. A half-eaten apple lay beside her on the plank. "Emma!" Mason called, horrified by the sight of her small form. "I'm coming down!" The metal access ladder was old, but seemed secure enough. Mason descended quickly, reaching the bottom where an inch of stagnant water still remained from the last rainfall. Emma lay trembling on the plank, her clothes soaked with sweat, lips cracked from dehydration. "Uncle Mason," she whispered, reaching for him with a shaking hand. "Spirit told you." "Shh, it's okay now," Mason soothed, gathering her into his arms. She felt alarmingly light, her skin hot to the touch. "I've got you, let's get you out of here." Climbing one-handed up the ladder while holding Emma was difficult, but Mason managed it through sheer determination. As they emerged from the tank, Spirit approached, gently nudging Emma's dangling feet with his nose. The horse's eyes were calmer now, but remained fixed on the child. "We need to get her to the house," Mason said, again speaking to the horse as if he were human. "She needs water and a doctor." Spirit followed closely as Mason carried Emma across the field, occasionally nickering softly as if to reassure the child that he was still there. Emma's head lolled against Mason's shoulder, her breathing shallow. "Stay with me, kiddo," Mason murmured, picking up his pace. "We're almost there." The lights of the ranch house appeared through the darkness. As they approached, Mason shouted for help. Martha Potts emerged onto the porch, her hand flying to her mouth at the sight of them. "Call Dr. Mitchell," Mason ordered, pushing past her into the house. "And bring water, room temperature, not cold. She's dehydrated." Martha rushed to obey while Mason carried Emma to the sofa in the living room. As he laid her down gently, he became aware of commotion outside. Spirit had followed them right up to the house and was now pacing anxiously on the front lawn, refusing to be led away by the ranch hands who had appeared at the commotion. "Let him stay," Mason called through the open door. "He's not hurting anything." Inside, Martha returned with water and damp cloths. Together, they helped Emma drink small sips, cooling her overheated skin with the cloths. The child was disoriented but conscious, her eyes repeatedly drifting to the window where Spirit's white form was visible in the yard. "How did you get locked in that tank, sweetie?" Martha asked gently, stroking Emma's hair back from her forehead. Emma's brow furrowed. "I was watching the butterflies by the field. Then I heard someone call my name." Her voice trailed off, confusion clouding her expression. "Did you see who it was?" Mason pressed. Emma shook her head weakly. "They said to look inside the tank, that there was something special down there. I climbed up to see, and then—" She paused, struggling to piece together the fragmented memory. "I fell in, and the lid closed. It was so hot and dark." Martha exchanged a troubled glance with Mason. "The hatch is heavy, Emma. It wouldn't close on its own." "And it was padlocked," Mason added quietly. "Someone locked you in there." A shiver ran through Emma despite the warmth of the room. "Spirit knew," she whispered. "He always knows things." Outside, as if in response to his name, the white horse whinnied, a sound that carried through the night air like a declaration. Dr. Mitchell arrived 20 minutes later, his weathered face grim as he examined Emma. After checking her vital signs and administering emergency fluids, he stepped aside to speak quietly with Mason. "She's suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration," he explained. "Another few hours in that tank, and it could have been much worse. She needs rest and plenty of fluids, but she should recover fully." Mason nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, Doc." "I should report this to the sheriff," Dr. Mitchell added, his voice hardening. "A child locked in an abandoned tank. That's no accident." "I'll handle that," Mason assured him. "Tom Reynolds is a family friend." After the doctor left, Mason sat beside Emma's sleeping form, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Martha had made up a bed for her in the living room, keeping her close for observation through the night. Outside, Spirit remained a vigilant presence, refusing to return to his stable despite old Bob's best efforts. "Never seen anything like it," Bob said, stepping inside for a cup of coffee around midnight. "That horse won't budge. Acts like he's standing guard." Mason rubbed his face tiredly. "He's the one who found her, Bob, if he hadn't led me to that tank." The implication hung in the air between them. "Who would do such a thing?" Martha whispered, tears in her eyes as she tucked a blanket around Emma's small frame. Mason had been asking himself the same question, a cold weight settling in his stomach as he considered the possibilities. The new padlock troubled him most. Old. Bob had secured the tank that afternoon, but someone had replaced his lock with a different one, deliberately trapping Emma inside. At dawn, Sheriff Reynolds arrived, his expression grave as Mason recounted the events of the previous night. They stood on the porch, speaking in low voices to avoid waking Emma. "I want to check that tank myself," the sheriff said, "and I'll need to talk to Emma when she's feeling better." Mason nodded. "Of course, whatever you need." As they walked toward the irrigation tank, Spirit finally left his post by the house to follow them, maintaining a watchful distance. "That horse hasn't left her side all night," Mason explained. "He's the one who alerted me that something was wrong." The sheriff glanced at the white stallion with newfound respect. "Animals know things we don't sometimes." At the tank, they examined the broken padlock and the interior where Emma had been trapped. The sheriff bagged the lock as evidence, his face grim. "This was deliberate, Mason. Someone meant to harm that child." Mason's throat tightened. "I know. Anyone new around the ranch lately? Workers? Visitors?" "Just the development team," Mason replied. "They've been touring the property all week." The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need a list of names." As they walked back toward the house, the sheriff broached the subject Mason had been avoiding. "Word is, you're selling Whitewater, Mason. After all these generations." Mason shoved his hands in his pockets. "The ranch isn't profitable anymore, Tom. I can't keep pouring money into it." "Your daddy managed." "My father was content to break even. I'm not built that way." Sheriff Reynolds stopped walking, turning to face Mason directly. "The East Pasture and Old Stable area, that's where most of the development would start, right?" Mason nodded warily. "That's the plan. Why?" "Just find it interesting that Emma spent most of her time in that exact area with this horse." "The key?" Sheriff gestured toward Spirit, who stood watching them intently. "And now someone tries to remove her from the equation. Makes a man wonder." The implication hit Mason like a physical blow. "You think I had something to do with this? She's my niece, for God's sake." "I'm just connecting dots, Mason. You need this sale to go through. The contract probably requires clear ownership, no family complications. A tragic accident involving your sister's kid might just convince Olivia to stay away from Whitewater. For good." "That's insane," Mason protested, genuine horror in his voice. "I would never." "Then help me figure out who would," the sheriff cut in. "Because someone on this ranch tried to hurt that little girl, and I mean to find out who." Inside the house, Emma woke shortly after sunrise, asking immediately for Spirit. Mason helped her to the window, where she could see the white horse grazing nearby, lifting his head every few minutes to check on the house. "He saved me," Emma said simply, her hand pressed against the glass. "Yes, he did," Mason agreed, a lump forming in his throat. Emma turned to him, her green eyes serious beyond her years. "The person who called my name. I think they were wearing boots like yours." Mason felt the blood drain from his face. "Emma, I was in Bozeman yesterday. I didn't get back until evening." "Not you," Emma clarified, "but boots like yours. The shiny kind, not cowboy boots." Mason's mind raced. The development team had toured the property yesterday, all of them wearing city shoes or casual hiking boots, not the worn cowboy boots favored by the ranch hands. One of them had asked specifically about the irrigation tank during their meeting. Before he could pursue this thought, the telephone rang. Mason answered to find his sister Olivia on the line, her voice tight with worry. "Mason, is everything okay? I had the strangest feeling last night that something was wrong with Emma." Mason hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "There was an incident, Liv. Emma's okay, but what happened?" The sharpness in Olivia's voice cut through the line. "She got locked in the old irrigation tank yesterday. She's fine now, dehydrated and tired, but Dr. Mitchell says she'll make a full recovery." Silence stretched across the connection. Then Olivia spoke, her voice eerily calm. "Locked in? What do you mean, locked in?" "Someone padlocked the hatch while she was inside." Mason swallowed hard. "Sheriff Reynolds is investigating." "I'm coming home," Olivia said immediately. "Today. I'll be on the next flight." "Liv, you don't need to cut your trip short. Emma's fine, and my daughter was locked in a metal tank in the Montana summer, Mason. She could have died." Olivia's voice broke. "Put her on the phone right now." Mason brought the telephone to Emma, who brightened at hearing her mother's voice. Their conversation was brief, with Emma doing most of the listening, occasionally glancing at Mason with unreadable expressions. When she handed the phone back, Olivia's voice was ice cold. "I'll be there tomorrow. Don't let her out of your sight until then." The line went dead before Mason could respond. That afternoon, Emma insisted on visiting Spirit, refusing to rest until Mason agreed to carry her to the old stable. The white horse met them halfway, falling into step beside them like a devoted guardian. "He missed me," Emma said, reaching out to stroke his neck as Mason set her down on a hay bale inside the stable. "I think he did," Mason agreed, watching. The gentle way the powerful animal nuzzled the child's hair. Emma looked up at her uncle, her expression suddenly serious. "Are you going to sell Spirit, Uncle Mason?" The question caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that? I heard you talking to the men in shiny shoes. They want to build houses where Spirit lives." Mason sat beside her on the hay bale, choosing his words carefully. "Whitewater Ranch is very expensive to keep running, Emma. Sometimes adults have to make hard decisions about money." Emma's lower lip trembled. "But this is Spirit's home, and the other horses too, and old Bob and Mrs. Potts." "They could find new homes," Mason said, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Spirit wouldn't be happy anywhere else," Emma insisted. "Grandpa promised he could stay here forever. Mr. Bob told me." Mason looked around the old stable, at the worn wooden beams his grandfather had placed, at the sunlight filtering through windows his father had installed. Decades of Hawkins family history surrounded them, as tangible as the mountain air. "Your mother will be here tomorrow," he said, instead of addressing her concern. "She's cutting her trip short." Emma brightened. "Really? Is she bringing butterflies?" "I don't think they let you bring butterflies on airplanes." Mason smiled, relieved by the change of subject. As they sat in companionable silence, Spirit suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward toward the entrance of the stable. A second later, footsteps sounded on the gravel outside. "Hello?" called an unfamiliar voice. "Mr. Hawkins, are you in there?" Mason tensed, instinctively moving closer to Emma. "Who's there?" A man appeared in the doorway, one of the developers who had toured the property the previous day. He wore hiking boots and an expensive outdoor jacket, a camera hanging around his neck. "Sorry to intrude," the man said smoothly. "I wanted some additional photographs of the eastern property line for our proposal. Your housekeeper said I might find you out here." Mason stood, positioning himself between Emma and the visitor. "You should have called first, Mr. Daniels." "Richard, please," the man insisted, his gaze shifting to Emma. "And this must be your niece. I heard there was some excitement last night. Glad to see she's doing better." Something in the man's tone raised the hairs on the back of Mason's neck. Behind him, Spirit snorted aggressively, pawing at the ground. "How did you hear about that?" Mason asked carefully. Richard Daniels shrugged. "Small towns, you know. Word gets around. His eyes moved to Spirit, narrowing slightly. Magnificent animal. Shame he'll have to be relocated once development begins. Emma clutched Mason's hand tightly. Spirit took a step forward, his posture suddenly threatening. "I think you should leave," Mason said quietly. "We can reschedule your photography session for another day." The developer lingered a moment too long, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Of course. We're all so looking forward to working with you, Mason. This property has tremendous potential." After tea, the man departed. Mason noticed something odd, a fine layer of reddish dust on the developer's hiking boots, identical to the distinctive clay soil found around the old irrigation tank. Spirit remained agitated long after the visitor left, pacing nervously and positioning himself protectively near Emma. The child seemed to sense the horse's unease, her earlier animation fading into watchful silence. Back at the house, Mason asked Martha about the developer's visit. "He just showed up at the door, said he had an appointment with you," she explained. "I told him you might be at the stables with Emma. If he comes back, don't let him in," Mason instructed, "and call Sheriff Reynolds immediately." That evening, as twilight painted the mountains purple and gold, Mason sat on the porch watching Emma doze in a wicker chair beside him. Spirit grazed within sight, raising his head every few minutes to scan the surroundings before returning. To his vigil, old Bob joined Mason, offering a cup of coffee which Mason accepted gratefully. "Sheriff called," the foreman reported quietly. "Said the lock wasn't one of ours. Brand new, bought at a hardware store in Bozeman yesterday morning." Mason's hands tightened around his mug. "I was in Bozeman yesterday morning, meeting with the developers." Bob nodded slowly. "Sheriff mentioned that. Also said one of those developers made a strange comment to the clerk about needing the strongest lock they had. Something about keeping things contained on a ranch property." A chill ran through Mason despite the warm evening air. He glanced at Emma's sleeping form, then at Spirit's protective presence in the field. "Bob," he said quietly, "when did my father find that horse?" The old foreman's weathered face softened. "With memory. 15 years ago, after that terrible blizzard, your daddy found him standing over his mother's body. Just a colt then, half frozen, but refusing to leave her. Said he'd never seen such loyalty in an animal. And Dad kept him separate from the other horses, never used him for work. Said he was too special," Bob confirmed. "Your daddy believed that horse could sense things others couldn't. Danger, sickness, changes in the weather. The hands used to joke that Spirit knew things before they happened." Mason watched the white horse lift his head again, scanning the darkening property with alert attention. "I don't think it's a joke," Mason said softly. The Montana dawn crept over the eastern ridge, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. Mason hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in a chair beside Emma's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, replaying fragments of conversation in his mind. Outside the window, Spirit remained where he had stationed himself the previous evening. Beneath, the old oak tree with a clear view of Emma's bedroom, the horse had refused food and water, maintaining his self-appointed guard duty with unwavering vigilance. As first light touched the ranch buildings, Mason heard tires on the gravel driveway. He moved to the window and saw Sheriff Reynolds' patrol car pulling up, followed by another vehicle he didn't recognize. Mason slipped quietly from Emma's room and headed downstairs. The sheriff stood on the porch with a grim expression. "Mason," he nodded, "got some news you need to hear." Mason ushered him into the kitchen, where Martha was already brewing coffee. "What is it?" "We checked the hardware store security footage," Reynolds said, accepting a steaming mug from Martha. "Got a clear image of who bought that padlock." He slid a grainy photograph across the table. Mason stared at the familiar face. Richard Daniels, the developer who had appeared at the stable the previous afternoon. "We also found these in his hotel room," the sheriff continued, producing an evidence bag containing a set of papers. "Copies of your development contract. There's an interesting clause highlighted on page 12. Mason scanned the document, his blood running cold. The clause stated that if any accident or fatality occurred on the property before closing, the purchase price would be automatically reduced by 30% due to liability concerns and potential negative publicity. "He tried to kill my niece for a discount?" Mason whispered, horror and rage building in equal measure. "Looks that way," the sheriff confirmed. "He's in custody now, caught him trying to leave town last night." Martha gasped, crossing herself. "That poor child. Thank God for that horse." "Where is he now?" "Daniels?" Mason asked, his voice hard. "County jail. His company is already distancing themselves, claiming he was acting alone." Sheriff Reynolds regarded Mason steadily. "Seems he got greedy. Figured if something happened to your niece, you'd be desperate to sell quick, especially with a grieving sister to deal with." Mason pushed away from the table, pacing the kitchen. "I would never have signed with them, not after—" He stopped, the full weight of his own culpability crashing down on him. "This is my fault. I brought these people here." "You didn't know what he was capable of," the sheriff said. "But I'll be honest, Mason, your plan to sell this place hasn't sat right with a lot of folks around here. Your daddy protected this land for reasons that went beyond money." Before Mason could respond, a car door slammed outside. Through the window, he saw his sister Olivia climbing out of a taxi, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "Lives here," he said quietly. Sheriff Reynolds stood. "I'll leave you to it. She'll need to give a statement later, but that can wait. Take care of your family first." Mason met Olivia on the porch, the morning sun illuminating the dark circles beneath her eyes. Without a word, she pulled him into a fierce hug, then pushed him away just as quickly. "Where is she?" Olivia demanded. "Still sleeping upstairs. She's okay, Liv. Dr. Mitchell checked her again last night." Olivia nodded tersely, then froze as her gaze moved past Mason to the white horse, standing sentinel beneath the oak tree. "Is that Spirit?" Mason confirmed. "He's the one who found her. Hasn't left his post since we got her out." Something flickered across Olivia's face. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. Dad's horse. "He saved her life," Mason said simply. Olivia turned back to her brother, years of unspoken tension hanging between them. "Sheriff Reynolds called me from the airport, told me everything." Her voice hardened. "You were going to sell this place out from under us. The ranch that's been in our family for generations, to people who nearly killed my daughter." Mason flinched at the raw accusation in her words. "I didn't know what Daniels would do. I never thought—" "That's the problem, isn't it?" Olivia cut in. "You never thought about what this place means to anyone but yourself. It was just another asset to leverage." Before Mason could defend himself, a small voice called from the doorway, "Mommy!" Emma stood there in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, eyes wide with surprise and joy. In an instant, Olivia was across the porch, gathering her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "My baby," she whispered, rocking Emma gently. "I'm here now. I'm here." Over Olivia's shoulder, Emma's eyes met Mason's. She gave him a small smile, a gesture of forgiveness so simple and complete that it nearly undid him. From beneath the oak tree came a soft nickering. Emma wriggled free from her mother's embrace. "Spirit, he's waiting for me." "Honey, you need to rest," Olivia protested. "He's been watching over me all night," Emma insisted. "He needs to know I'm okay." Mason placed a gentle hand on his sister's shoulder. "It's all right, Liv. I'll carry her." Together they walked across the dew-dampened grass to where Spirit stood waiting. As they approached, the horse lowered his proud head, dark eyes fixed on Emma. Mason set the child down carefully, and she wrapped her arms around Spirit's neck, burying her face in his mane. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're the best horse in the whole world." Spirit blew softly against her hair, nudging her gently as if checking her condition. Satisfied, he finally relaxed his vigilant posture, leaning into the child's embrace with quiet contentment. Olivia watched in amazement. "I've never seen him let anyone touch him like that. Dad always said he was particular." "He chose her," Mason said quietly, "just like he chose Dad." Later that morning, after Emma had been coaxed back inside for breakfast, Mason and Olivia sat at the kitchen table while Martha fussed over the child, plying her with pancakes and orange juice. Through the window, they could see Spirit, finally, accepting food and water from old Bob, though he remained within sight of the house. "The sheriff told me about the irrigation tank," Olivia said, her voice low to keep Emma from hearing. "How long was she in there?" "Hours," Mason admitted, the memory still raw. "If Spirit hadn't alerted me..." Olivia closed her eyes briefly, composing herself. "And this developer, he did it for money, a contractual discount." Mason nodded grimly. He saw Emma as an obstacle to the deal. Remove her, upset you, pressure me to sell quickly at a reduced price. And you were. "In going to sell," Olivia stated, not a question but a fact. Mason stared into his coffee. "Yes, the East Pasture, the old stables, all of it. Where Emma spent her days, where Spirit lives." "It was just business live," Mason said, though the word sounded hollow even to his own ears. "The ranch costs more to maintain than it brings in. I was being practical." "Practical," Olivia repeated, her voice hardening. "Dad's body isn't even cold, and you were ready to bulldoze everything he built, everything our family protected for generations." "Protected?" Mason's frustration bubbled over. "It's just land, Olivia. Just buildings and fences and animals that eat money. Is that all you see when you look out there?" Olivia gestured toward the window, where the mountains rose majestically beyond the pastures. "Dollar signs and liabilities?" Before Mason could respond, Emma piped up from her seat at the counter. "Uncle Mason was scared too, Mummy, but Spirit helped him remember." Both adults turned to look at the child, who was calmly cutting her pancakes into precise triangles. "Remember what, sweetheart?" Olivia asked gently. Emma shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. "That home isn't just where you sleep, it's where you belong." She looked up at her uncle with those solemn green eyes. "Right, Uncle Mason?" Something broke open inside Mason's chest. A wall he'd carefully constructed years ago when he'd left the ranch, determined to build a different life than his father had chosen. He'd told himself he was being smart, strategic, unsentimental. But sitting here, in the kitchen where he'd eaten countless meals as a boy, with his sister across from him and his niece's innocent wisdom cutting through his defenses, the truth was unavoidable. He'd been running away all this time, not just from the ranch, but from the part of himself that had once loved this place bone deep. "I think," Mason said slowly, "I've forgotten a lot of important things." Later that day, Sheriff Reynolds returned with more questions for Emma. The child recounted her experience with surprising clarity, describing how a man with city boots had called her name near the irrigation tank, telling her there were butterfly cocoons inside that she should see. "He said they were like the ones Mommy studies," Emma explained. "I climbed up to look, and then I fell in. It was dark, and the door shut. I called for help, but nobody came." "You're very brave," the sheriff told her gently. "Did you see the man's face?" Emma nodded. "He had sunglasses on, but I saw him again when he came to the stable yesterday. He pretended he didn't know me." The sheriff exchanged a significant look with Mason. "That matches what we found. We've got him cold." After the sheriff left, Mason retreated to his father's study, buried himself in paperwork. Not development plans this time, but the ranch's financial records. Hours passed as he pored over accounts, tax documents, and operational expenses, making notes and calculations until the sun began to set. A knock at the door interrupted his work. Olivia stood there, a steaming mug in her hand. "Martha says you missed lunch and dinner. Thought you might need this." Mason accepted the coffee gratefully. Thanks. Olivia gestured at the papers spread across the desk. What are you doing? Trying to figure something out, Mason replied, running a hand through his hair. The ranch finances are worse than I thought, but better than I told myself they were. Meaning? Meaning I exaggerated the financial burden to justify selling, Mason admitted, but there are still real problems that need solving. Olivia leaned against the doorframe. Dad managed. Barely, Mason pointed out, and he was drawing down his savings toward the end. It's not sustainable without changes. No, so you still want to sell? Mason looked up at his sister, really seeing her for the first time since she'd arrived. The stubborn set of her jaw, so like their father's. The intelligence in her eyes, the fierce protectiveness that had brought her rushing home at the first sign of danger to her child. No, he said simply, I don't want to sell. But I also don't want to watch this place slowly die because we can't afford to keep it running. He gestured to his calculations. There's a middle path, I think, if we're willing to work for it. Something shifted in Olivia's expression, wariness giving way to cautious hope. What kind of middle path? Modernize some operations, diversify income streams, maybe open the ranch for limited tourism, trail rides, photography workshops, that kind of thing. Mason hesitated, but keep the core intact. No development, no sale. Keep it in the family. You'd stay? Olivia asked, surprise evident in her voice. Give up Chicago? Mason hadn't fully formed the thought until that moment, but as the words left his mouth, he knew they were true. I think I need to come home, Liv. For real this time. A week later, Mason stood on the ridge overlooking Whitewater Ranch, watching Emma and Spirit in the east pasture below. The child sat cross-legged in the grass while the white horse grazed contentedly nearby, occasionally raising his head to check on her. In the distance, ranch hands moved cattle between pastures, the rhythm of work as steady and reliable as the mountains themselves. Sheriff Reynolds pulled up in his patrol car, joining Mason on the ridge. Thought you'd want to know. Daniels is being charged with attempted murder and kidnapping. His company is cooperating fully, trying to save their reputation. Good, Mason said quietly. What about the other developers? Word's gotten around. Think you'll find most of them have suddenly lost interest in Whitewater Ranch. The sheriff smiled slightly. Funny how that works. They stood in companionable silence, watching the ranch activity below. Finally, the sheriff spoke again. Daddy would be proud, Mason. Keeping the place going won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. Mason nodded, thinking of the decisions he'd made in the past week, canceling development contracts, hiring an agricultural consultant to improve cattle operations, discussing ecotourism possibilities with Olivia. The path forward was challenging, but clear. I forgot what this place was, Mason admitted. Not just land or assets, but something alive, something worth protecting. Reynolds clapped him on the shoulder. Better late than never to remember. After the sheriff departed, Mason made his way down to the pasture where Emma was teaching Spirit to bow. Or more accurately, the horse seemed to be humoring the child by dipping his head on command, earning delighted giggles and apple slices as rewards. Uncle Mason, Emma called, waving excitedly. Spirit learned a new trick. Mason approached, still slightly amazed at how the normally reserved horse welcomed his presence now. Very impressive, he said, reaching out to stroke Spirit's neck. The horse allowed the touch, dark eyes regarding Mason with what seemed like approval. Mommy says we're staying for the whole summer, Emma announced happily, and maybe Christmas too. That's the plan, Mason confirmed. You, your mom, and me, we've got a lot of work to do around here. Emma nodded seriously. Spirit says the fences need fixing by the creek. Mason raised an eyebrow. Oh, what else does Spirit say? The child leaned closer, dropping her voice to a stage whisper. He says you're becoming more like Grandpa every day. Something caught in Mason's throat, grief mingled with unexpected pride. "I hope that's true, Emma. I really do." That evening, as sunset transformed the mountains into silhouettes against a flame-colored sky, the Hawkins family gathered on the porch of the ranch house. Old Bob and Martha joined them, along with several ranch hands and their families, all drawn together by the simple pleasure of shared space and purpose. Emma sat on the steps, leaning against Spirit, who had been granted the unprecedented privilege of approaching the house proper. The horse stood perfectly still, seemingly content to serve as a backrest for the child who had claimed his heart. Mason watched his niece whisper something in the white horse's ear, then giggle as if he had responded. Around them, conversations flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional sympathetic murmur, as the events of the past week were processed and absorbed by the community that called Whitewater home. Olivia approached, handing Mason a glass of their father's favorite bourbon. "Penny for your thoughts?" Mason accepted the drink, considering the question. "I'm thinking about something Dad used to say, that land remembers who loves it and who doesn't." "Sounds like him," Olivia smiled. "Poetic and a little mystical." "I thought it was nonsense," Mason admitted, "but I'm not so sure anymore." He nodded toward Emma and Spirit. "There's something special here, something worth preserving." "So, partner," Olivia said, raising her glass, "to Whitewater's future." Mason clinked his glass against hers. "To coming home." As darkness settled over the valley, stars appearing like diamond dust scattered across the vast Montana sky, Mason felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The ranch would survive, not as a development or a resort, but as what it had always been meant to be, a refuge, a working testament to his family's connection to this land. Emma eventually dozed off against Spirit's side, her small face peaceful, in sleep. Mason gently gathered her into his arms, nodding to the white horse as if in acknowledgement of a passing watch. Spirit nickered softly, then turned toward his stable, evidently satisfied that his charge was safe for the night. "I've got her," Mason whispered to Olivia. "You enjoy the evening?" As he carried his sleeping niece inside, her head heavy against his shoulder, Mason caught a reflection of himself in the hallway mirror. His father's eyes looking back at him, his grandfather's determined set of jaw. Generations of Hawkins men who had chosen this land, this life, this purpose. In Emma's room, Mason carefully tucked her into bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. The child stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Uncle Mason," she murmured, sleepily, "are we home now?" "Yes, Emma," he answered, his voice husky with emotion. "We're home." Outside the window, a white shape moved through the darkness, Spirit making his nightly rounds of the property, a silent guardian keeping watch over all that was precious at Whitewater Ranch. The horse paused beneath Emma's window, raising his head as if sensing Mason's gaze, then continued on his self-appointed patrol. Mason stood for a long time at the window, watching as Spirit's form disappeared into the shadows, then reappeared in moonlight. The white horse moved with purpose and certainty, belonging to this place in a way that transcended ownership or utility. In that moment, Mason understood what his father had protected all these years, not just land or livestock or buildings, but something more elusive and vital, a place where belonging was possible, where connections ran deeper than blood or business, where a horse could save a child and a grown man could find his way home. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, unchanging and eternal. Whitewater Ranch nestled in their embrace, its lights a constellation of human warmth against the vastness of Montana night. And moving through it all, a white horse kept watch, not magical, but deeply attuned to the rhythms and needs of this place and its people. Some would call it instinct, some might call it loyalty, But standing there in the quiet darkness, watching over his sleeping niece, Mason Hawkins called it wisdom. The wisdom to recognize what truly matters, to protect what is precious, and to find one's way back to the place where you truly belong. Outside, Spirit continued his rounds, a ghostly guardian moving through moonlight and shadow. Inside, Mason made a silent promise to the sleeping child, to the sister finding her way back to trust, to the father whose legacy now rested in his hands, and to himself. Whitewater would endure, not as a monument to the past or a sacrifice, to progress, but as a living bridge between generations, a place where a white horse could stand guard over a sleeping child and a man could remember what it meant to truly come home. Did you fall in love with Emma and Spirit's journey? Their story reminds us that some bonds transcend understanding and that home is wherever we truly belong. If this tale touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that celebrate the unbreakable connections between children, animals, and the places that shape them. Leave a like if Spirit's protective nature moved you, and share in the comments which moment brought tears to your eyes. Remember, every story we tell is a reminder that love and loyalty can overcome the darkest of circumstances.